Welcome to the Bear With Me podcast. On this episode, we're tackling some of the biggest insecurities men face, but rarely talk about. Everything from body image to penis size, comparison culture, and the journey towards self-acceptance. From the pressures to have the ideal male body to the unrealistic standards set by porn and social media, we break down where these insecurities come from and how men can begin to embrace their bodies without shame. We will also explore nudism as a path to body liberation, why stepping into our natural state can help us break free from body anxiety and redefine masculinity in a healthier and more accepting way. Bear with me. This is the Bear With Me podcast, and I'm your host, Jay. And who am I? I'm just a 34-year-old black man in America who just happens to be a nudist. My identity as a black man and a nudist plays a significant role in how I've come to see the world. I came to find nudism through my journey into body positivity. I found that my experiences were things that others could benefit from hearing. So here we are. Welcome to my world. I think it's critically important to reflect on my journey up to this point in order to understand the impact my past has on where I'm going. So if you've chosen to join me on this journey today, I truly appreciate it. I promise it'll all be worth it. Bear with me. Welcome to the Bear With Me podcast. I am your host, Jay, and today we have a really special episode. Today is a first of sorts. We're going to be joined by Gareth Johnson, who is the host of the Naked Men Talking podcast, live from the UK. So you're in for a treat. I can't wait to jump into this conversation. Gareth, go ahead and say hello to the people.
Thanks for having me on the show.
No problem. Thank you for joining me. Yeah, tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you said, I've got a podcast called Naked Men Talking. It's been running for a bit over a year now, I guess. Day job, I'm a journalist. I'm a freelance journalist. I'm at the moment trying to survive the winter in the UK. It's cold and grey in London, but we've got the heating on and we're doing our best.
I can't stress how excited I am to have you on the show. I guess to kind of get started, just wanted to think about how we connected, right? The world of social media is amazing these days. Like, you can literally tap in and connect to communities all over the world. And I think that's exactly how we came to meet. A friend of mine that I actually met after starting the podcast had sent something over on social media, and it would happen to be an interview that he did with you. And this friend was like, I think you should really reach out to Gareth and tap in. I think you all's podcast would be perfect to kind of like collab and connect. And so I just followed and shot my shot, right? I just kind of just threw a message out there and was just hoping for the best. And then, immediately you responded. Do you remember anything about that interaction?
No, totally. I love making Twitter friends around the world. But I think what's really powerful about social media, and something that we have the benefit of now that we might not have had in years gone by, is that ability to build community beyond the geographic restrictions of where we're located. And, there's a lot of bad things about social media, which we don't have time to get into. But the good thing is you can still find people with common interests, common experiences, and make authentic connections. And that's really powerful.
We definitely don't have time to kind of go into all the details about all the bad that exists on social media. But I do love that, especially in America right now, there seems to be this damper on the entire nation as it pertains to like diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And I think that one of the things that I love most about the Bear With Me podcast and other podcasts that I follow is that we literally have something that we can lend voice to different issues that are going on. But I love the fact that we can also connect with each other, like you said, across national lines, across geographical locations, and support one another in these conversations. So I'm super excited today. I don't know if you can tell, but I mean, like, this is like a first. So as the audience is learning a little bit more about you, thinking back on your upbringing, what conscious or maybe subconscious lessons were you taught about your body or maybe just bodies in general?
Mm, yeah, that's such a good question, isn't it? Because it's not often that you sort of sit back and reflect on some of that stuff. For me, I live in the UK now, but I grew up in Australia, and I grew up in a rural community in Australia. And so, I guess my experience of body image and body consciousness was really shaped by that context, but also by my sexuality. Because I'm a queer man, I was really second guessing myself for, certainly a lot of my youth and teenage years, because I felt like my body was going to betray me at any second and reveal all my secrets. And so that really starts to mess with your head after a while.
I guess your first lessons about how you thought about yourself, was it family, friends? Was it opinions and thoughts socially in Australia at the time that kind of really impacted you? Or, yeah, talk to
Mm.
me a little bit about that.
No, sure. Australia is a relatively socially conservative place. So, sometimes that surprises people. From the perception is it's very open and progressive, perhaps, but the reality is in many communities it's still fairly socially conservative. My, I guess, experience around developing bodies and developing sense of identity and self was primarily shaped through sport. I played a lot of sport growing up. We were, there was always in locker rooms getting changed around other guys. There was a lot of outdoor activity in that sense, and so you quickly get a sense of how people's bodies are changing and developing, and what different bodies are look like, and you know that's, I think, for me, was really formative in terms of understanding what was going on with me compared to what my peers were going through as well.
I think that the conversation about the locker room, I think that's a really, really important conversation for this episode in particular. And we're gonna definitely get back into that in a second. But I'm also curious to hear, like, when you think about the term body positivity, what
Mm.
immediately comes to mind?
Oh, complicated, isn't it? Because for me, I always think, body positivity at its core is about being comfortable with yourself and who you are, and looking in the mirror and feeling, okay with what's looking back at you. I mean, so it's not really relying on anyone else's opinions, or trying to get validation through from anyone else's perspective. It's being able to look at yourself and think, oh, I know what I look like, and I know my strengths and my weaknesses, but this is who I am, and I'm comfortable with that.
I mean, that's awesome. I love how you said that. Like, when being able to simply like look in the mirror and be okay with what's looking back at you. I think a lot of us kind of get held back because although body positivity should be something that's very personal, because of the world where we live in, people's opinions are often central to how we think about ourselves, right? And so I look at body positivity as a way to kind of separate yourself from the outside world, to truly just look in the mirror and decide what it is you like about yourself. So thank you for that analogy. That really makes sense. And it's definitely something that's really been impactful for me. Um, how do you think body positivity plays a role in your daily experience, or is it something that you're really conscious about?
Mm. I would say I'm overly conscious about it. And something I think about, it's come up in a few conversations I've had with people, has been, do you explore the concept of body neutrality at all, as opposed to body positivity? Is that something that you've touched on?
I've actually heard about it, but I mean, please explain it a little bit.
I'm not an expert, so I possibly am getting this not quite right. But in body positivity is, as the name suggests, having a very positive outlook on yourself and what you look like. Whereas my understanding of body neutrality is that it's what you look like becomes almost not a factor. You're sort of beyond even thinking about yourself in that physical sense in terms of positives or negatives. It's just you exist in this space and you exist in this body, and that doesn't shape who you are as a person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I can actually see why one would choose to go the body neutrality way. For me, body positivity is not necessarily about, being like always super positive about how you look. It's the process of striving to be comfortable in your skin. But I definitely think that, body neutrality adds another perspective for those people who may, when they hear body positivity, may not immediately gravitate to that way of thinking just because of how they may feel. And I think body neutrality adds a different layer, gives people maybe a different choice of how to look at themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, isn't it? It comes down to whatever works for you, for the individual. For me, I want to feel connected to my body. Like I want to feel really present, I guess, that I'm looking in the mirror and seeing myself as who I am. Part of how that sort of manifests is that I do quite a lot of social matcherism events, which is like getting naked with other people pretty regularly kind of thing. And, I don't want to ignore people's bodies because I feel for me that's part of the experience of being naked with other people. But it's just avoiding any judgment. But, let's see each other for who we are somehow.
Yeah, and so I feel like you kind of jumped the gun a little bit, right? So you jump right into
That's quite often, actually.
you jump right into social naturism and nudism for those who don't really get the naturism term, and we're definitely going to talk a lot about that. I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about as we just continue our conversation is the name of the podcast that you are the host of,
Mhm.
right? So you are the host of the Naked Men Talking podcast. And so I really wanted to have you on the show today. One, because I think that you have a diverse and a different perspective than what I think my listeners normally would get. But also, I think it's good when guys can get together and have open conversations. This isn't something that's really modeled in a lot of my friendships,
Mhm.
right? I can't think of too many friends of mine that I've actually sat down and we've had intimate conversations about body image and how we felt about ourselves and insecurity. Maybe two friends, one of which I've had on the Bear With Me podcast. So I think that this conversation particularly is really important because I think that it lends space for men to show up as their full selves with the people that love them the most. And a lot of us are going through a lot of the same things, or maybe grew up thinking a lot of the same things. And so I definitely wanted to create space for us to kind of unpack these conversations.
Mm.
So, with that being said, what role do you think social media plays, particularly in how men see themselves? Is social media something that could be helpful? Is it harmful, or is it a little bit of both?
Mhm. I think in terms of our relationship with our bodies and the way that we see ourselves and see other people, it's pretty hard to avoid a conclusion that's really, really harmful. There doesn't seem to be much positive at the moment. And I guess I'm saying that because what seems to come with any sort of social media interaction is some sort of permission structure for people to have judgment on what other people look like or what they're doing or what they're saying or how they're behaving kind of thing. And that judgment from people on the internet that you don't know can really have a massive impact on how you see yourself and how you experience the world. And, I think none of that matters in the real world, but it can have a huge impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Just kind of thinking about some of the things that we kind of already jumped into, right? We talked, about, why this episode in particular is so important. And like I said, I think that a lot of times men, we have these experiences that, when we look in the mirror, we might not always look like love was looking back
Mhm.
at us. You mentioned earlier the locker room.
Mm.
And I feel like we've all had that locker room moment growing up. Do you remember your first locker room experience?
Yeah, because I played Australian rules football growing up, and so it's what everyone did. So because it was one of those rural communities where everyone played football, and so the football club, you would have teams, starting at junior who'd play at the start of the day through until the senior team who'd be the headline match effectively. But you all shared the same locker room, and so as you were the junior team having showers, and this was back in the days when they had sort of open gang showers,
Okay.
you'd be getting changed after your match, and the next team would be getting ready, and so there was a lot of crossover interaction, not only between you and peers of your same age, but also guys of all ages, all in the same space, and so it was a very eye-opening experience for me as a young queer boy as well. That you realize what men look like, and you
Right.
you see it up close and personal, and that answers a lot of questions for you, really.
So you said it answers a lot of questions. Like, so what questions, I guess, were going through your mind if you can recall, at the time?
Yeah, because it gives you comparison points, I guess, doesn't it? Because you know what your own body looks like. You might have seen your father naked or your brother naked, kind of thing. But to see men of different cultural backgrounds, different genetic backgrounds, different shapes and sizes, and you get to compare and contrast in a really, relaxed and open way that, right, guys look different. There's, not everyone looks the same. People are growing at different paces. People's bodies, develop in different ways. Dicks look different. So there's no sense of, you don't have to be hung up on, is mine okay? Because I'm getting plenty of opportunities to compare it.
Right. And I think the very interesting point in what you're saying is one, how much I relate to that as well, but how casually you said that, bodies are different, right? And as somebody like I'm thinking about myself, as somebody who's 34 years old, I understand the concept that bodies look different, that all penises are different,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Since you jumped in and said, "Hey, dicks are different."
Let's talk about dicks.
You know what I mean? And but that's something that I'm okay with saying, right? That's something that I understand is not taboo. But right now, I'm thinking about my maybe 11 or 12-year-old self, and I don't think it was that simple back then, right? I believe, like, especially around the time of like puberty, I feel like that's when I was super aware of my body, and I was super aware of what others' bodies look like. Cause I can't remember caring, before puberty. It's
Mm,
like as soon as I hit middle school, and in the U.S., middle school is like sixth, seventh, and eighth grade.
mm,
So I was around 11 years old, and I think that was around the first time that I ever noticed other like nude bodies, that I ever started to compare what my body
mm,
looked like, and opposed to someone else's. I also remember that it seemed like the girls in like my class were like, penis crazy. I don't know where they were seeing these penises, but they had came up with this myth that, every guy should be 12 inches. And, thinking back, I'm like, Jesus, like, I'm 12. Like, you know, this isn't a thing for most grown men, let alone a 12-year-old boy. So, can you kind of talk about that, right? The difference between like where we are now versus maybe what goes on in the mind of a 12-year-old, and how, you know, maybe how you navigated, those experiences early on.
gosh, that's tricky, isn't it? I mean, because I think sex education in schools played a pretty big role in shaping our understanding at that time as well. And I'd be interested to hear in what your experience of sex education was at school. For us, it was very factual and biologically driven, effectively, in terms of here's how the body works, this is what you need to know. They certainly didn't get into anything around sexuality, which would have been really helpful for me personally, but it did a reasonable job in putting some context and framework around our lived experience of, okay, your bodies are changing, here's what's going on, which sort of helped to normalize some of that stuff, I guess. What
Okay.
about you? What did you experience at school?
Yeah, like thinking back on, I guess, sex ed in middle school, I think it was maybe a 30-minute session.
Oh,
One,
period.
I
That
want to say it was like in science class doing like biology. And what I remember is getting to class, there was a TV, the big TV that came in on a cart. So I'm kind of
I
dating
know the one.
myself. Like this is the early 2000s. And I remember there being a TV in the middle of the room, and I just remember us being super excited because one, it was science, like, and I'm very much of a sociology, open thinking type person. So like science, I hated it, but I was super excited because I was thinking like a TV, my teacher isn't going to be lecturing us, so great.
Visual learning
And
time. Yeah.
exactly. And I definitely remember my teacher, Mr. Washington. Shout out to Mr. Washington if he's still out here. But I remember Mr. Washington putting in this VHS tape. And what came next was like it was disgusting.
What do you
I,
mean?
I mean, I feel like the whole sex ed video was just videos of like what herpes on
Oh,
penises and vaginas look like. It talked about HIV and AIDS and gonorrhea and
what?
syphilis.
Straight into the STIs. No
I
warm
mean,
up. Just
I
like, here's what
yeah.
you.
I honestly I feel like it wasn't even a conversation. The video wasn't even like, you know, this is, what bodies look like. This is, what bodies are made for. It was just like, hi, welcome to this video, and we're going to show you a million clips of sexually transmitted infections. And then right after that, I want to say Mr. Washington pulled out a banana
Uh huh. Not put a condom.
and put a condom on it, and then the bell rang, right?
And that
So
was the end of your sex education.
I want to say that was it. And then mind you, around the same time, I think the majority of the conversations that I had about sex growing up, which impacted how I ultimately saw myself and my body, came from my parents.
Mhm.
And they really tried. I mean, I believe my dad bought like pop-up books and
Oh,
with
wow. That's
pictures
helpful.
in it. And I mean,
Yeah.
he would always, it was always awkward because he would like close this door and say, "Hey son, I just want to talk to you."
Hell,
And we would talk about all of this uncomfortable stuff. And I really hated those conversations.
he tried to do it, though. That's
I
really
mean,
impressive. Yeah.
yes, he really did try, and he was always open to, answering any questions, although like I avoided all kinds of conversations about the topic, so I never really asked him anything.
No.
I would say, as we talk about, male like body insecurity, penis size, comparison culture, I will say almost like what 95% of the education that I did receive came from early exposure to pornography.
Oh, because let's talk about that because I think that's fascinating. Because also that's not something that my sex education ever touched on, and I'm really not sure how they're handling it in schools now. But that's such an important thing, isn't it? That it's talk about your experience about how you learned about stuff through watching porn.
Yeah, so I even as an adult, I am super curious and interested in learning any and everything, to be honest. And although right now I know how to filter
Mhm.
certain things as a 11-year-old boy, I don't even think I had the mental capability of like ingesting certain information, blocking some things out, where opening my mind to other things.
Mm.
It was pretty much like opening the floodgates, and I end up drowning,
Yeah, because
right?
you've got
So
no critical reasoning at that point, have you? Like all you've
right.
got is incoming information and nothing to none of those filters that you're talking about.
Exactly. So I definitely remember, I think my introduction into pornographic material came from the early days of the internet, to be
Mm.
honest. I just remember like those pop-ups that used to pop up on AOL, dial up, and you're trying to click it away, and then you click the X, and then that brings up some kind of like a half naked man and woman. And for somebody that was 11 years old, I mean, it definitely caught my eye. And then I remember like early social media sites, that we were just kids just trying to jump in the chat rooms, right? And just have conversations. But also, these chat rooms were filled with adults. And I'm like, at this time, 12, you know what I mean? And so people were sharing things and links and all of these things. And so I was just being curious and clicking. And one thing led to another. I was at a cousin's house and I found, a tape. I actually stole his tape.
Mhm.
I hid it, in my backpack, went home, waited till my parents were asleep, and I checked it out for the first time. And I want to say that was the moment that truly changed my life, right? I think that immediately, what you see on the screen, that was like the first time that I had really ever seen bodies that looked like that. And it seemed to kind of align with what I was hearing from, the girls in my class of what they expected.
You think they'd seen
So
the same tape, maybe?
exactly. Maybe they got the tape a year earlier. However, I think immediately at that point, I started to make, you know, certain things true, right? In order for my body to be desirable, in order for me to stand out and be popular in school, at the time, I just wanted people to like me.
Mm.
I needed to look like the adult entertainers that were on the screen.
Yeah, it's a tough benchmark to be measuring yourself against, isn't it?
Absolutely, because the reality is, and like I said, this is me at 34 now speaking.
Mhm.
Um, no one really looks like that, right? Like, and porn isn't really what you think it is, right?
It's not real. No.
It's really not real. It's fabricated. There's breaks. They pick the biggest guys and the most full women, or they literally have a team. And I actually watched a documentary about this years later, but they have a team in which they go out and scout for different body types that play into certain desires, right? So not only was I looking at, content that was handcrafted to appease an adult audience,
Uh,
I think that if I would have took my dad up on that offer to kind of talk about things, I really think I would have saved myself maybe 20 years of extreme insecurity and comparison, and probably would have been more comfortable in my skin a lot earlier.
no, there's an alternate universe where your dad asked you if you had any questions and you raised this with him and you talked about it and you ended up in a different place. But explain a little bit about you mentioned the insecurities that sort of manifested as a result of that. How did that sort of play out? So you're 12, you're measuring yourself against porn stars that you see on screen, and you're realizing that your body doesn't look like theirs. What does that mean for you?
Well, I think, like I said, before that time period, and I'm like I said, I'm using like the age gap between maybe like 11 and 13,
Yeah.
where this is really happening. Like I was saying earlier, I never really remember being like, I never cared about my body at all before that. My earliest memory of like being just like naked publicly was my dad signed me up for a swim class. He had this belief, there's this stereotype in America that black people don't swim. And so he was just like, because he can't swim. And
He was the stereotype.
yeah, he literally was a living, breathing example of the stereotype. And so he really wanted me to learn how to swim, and I love water. So I just remember it being a rule. So like once you change into your swim trunks, you had to shower. So
Uh,
um I didn't really care about nudity at the time because my dad didn't. And he was pretty much where I picked up a lot of my social cues from at the time.
mm.
And so we would just get undressed and put our trunks on, and there were other fathers with their sons and other guys in the locker room, and like everybody was pretty chill about it. So that was my first introduction. But it's like as soon as pornography was kind of introduced into the picture, I started to be super concerned with, how I looked and what I didn't have. So at that point, I almost started to like retreat and hide myself because it's almost like I felt like everybody had Superman powers. And when they looked at me, they can see through my clothes and tell what I had, right? And so I even started wearing like gym shorts under my pants, every day as like an added barrier. Like, and also you got to think around this time, puberty is happening.
Yeah.
So, erections are becoming a thing and they were random. You know what I mean? And so I think you see it in these movies now where they make fun of it, where like, the teacher calls you up to the front and you have on like gray sweatpants, and then you look over and you see somebody that you find attractive, and as soon as you're supposed to stand up, something else stands up, and then you have this awkward moment where you're like holding a folder and you're trying to stand in front of the class and give the longest speech in human history, right? But that was literally my reality. And so again, I felt like I was just visible.
Yeah.
And it caused me to, the insecurity that I started to develop. Not only did I hate my body, but it's almost like it translated into me hiding and kind of uh, not allowing people to get really close to me.
Oh, yeah, physically and emotionally kind of thing. You're wearing gym shorts underneath your trousers, and
Yes, yes.
were other people doing that? Did you talk about this with anyone?
Yeah, yeah, but I think other people would say they were doing it for different reasons. Similar to like, I guess in Australia, how, you all grew up playing, football,
Uh-huh.
right? And then I guess what you all call football is what we call soccer in the US.
No, it's slightly different. They do play that in Australia as well, but I played Australian rules, which is it looks a bit like rugby, I guess,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
it's a ball sport, similar
Okay,
stuff.
yeah. I didn't want to assume. So in the US, or especially just in my community, basketball was a huge thing. And so we all wanted to be like Mike, just like the Gatorade commercials. And
Yeah.
I grew up in the 90s, so I mean he was our idol. Later we all wanted to be like Kobe.
Mhm.
So with that being said, a lot of guys that I grew up with, we came prepared to play basketball
Oh,
at
right,
any
great.
at any drop of the dime, at
My
any
shorts are
moment.
on,
My
ready.
shorts
Yeah.
are on. I have my sneakers. All I have to do is remove this barrier. And that was really like the excuse that I used. You know what I mean? I was honestly wearing shorts to have a barrier so that, if an erection would happen, like it'll be an extra barrier to kind of protect me from being seen.
Yeah.
Like I said, I automatically felt like, people had superpowers and can see straight through to my skeleton, right? And my gym shorts were like, magic in a sense that it protected me from being seen. It's crazy talking about it now and how ridiculous this sounds, but at 12 years old, I wouldn't leave the house without a clean pair of shorts. And you know what's crazy? I'm 34 years old and I still do that.
Wait, what? You still wear shorts underneath your trousers?
I still wear shorts underneath my trousers.
Why are
Like,
you still wearing shorts?
I think it just became a habit.
Really?
And which is interesting. We haven't jumped into like the nudism conversation all the way yet. But I've been a nudist for much of my life. Like I feel like I started to become a nudist like right after, or at least becoming interested in it right after that time that I was exposed to pornography. And I talked about that on other
Mm.
episodes. But I think as far as social nudism, I started to kind of get connected to that around my 20s, my early 20s. And, so I've been doing body positivity work, or I've been doing work around nudism and how it can be used to kind of transform and help how you see yourself and how it helps with, confidence and canceling out some of the negative things that we've learned over the years. But I think that goes a lot to show that even though you can be in a space where you're perfectly comfortable and have normalized nudity, some things just don't go away.
Takes a lot to unlearn what you developed at 12, I think, doesn't it? That's really true.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Because I
yeah.
think, some things just become like a habit. So although there's no shame anymore,
Yeah.
right? The habit that was formed back when I was like 11 or 12 years old still exists today.
Can you talk a little bit about how your relationship with pornography evolved over time then? Because as you described, you had a pretty, full on exposure at that early age, and that, set some benchmarks that you were measuring yourself against. How did that evolve over time? Were you watching a lot of porn as you were growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually don't think that I did much of anything else, to be honest
It
with you.
was your passion.
I mean, there was things like eating, breathing, the occasional drink of water, and then there was porn. Like, I mean, it really consumed my life in a way because and for some reason I had never had the porn conversation with my parents.
Uh-huh.
That wasn't a part of my education, my sex education.
Did they
Uh
maybe not realize what you could access through the internet? Because they
I,
were pre-internet people, weren't they?
yeah,
So
I don't think they had an understanding. They just
yeah,
knew that they couldn't use the phone for a long period of time because
downloading.
I was working on a dissertation for a doctorate degree at the age of 11. But no, I think that it was due to the amount of pornography that I watched growing up that it really kind of shaped my mind around these ideas and these myths that, bigger is better, that, there's only one type of body that's desirable, that my body would never be desirable, that in order for me to exist and not be teased and made fun of, that I needed to hide myself.
How did you navigate that transition then when you started having real world, actual sexual encounters with people, which required you to take off your basketball shorts? How did you mentally make that happen if you had this perception that you weren't measuring up?
See, this is where, one, I love interviewing people who are also
Yeah.
podcasters, right? Because, now the microscope is on me a little bit. And, it's always more comfortable to talk about other people. But no, I really enjoy this because I don't get this opportunity often. So again, like when I say I avoided people, I truly avoided
In
people
every sense of the word.
in
Okay.
every sense of the
Yeah.
word. So like I just remember, starting to date around 16.
Mhm.
And, I grew up in a church. My family is, religious. We're Christian. And I just remember like lying to everybody and just like telling them, "Oh, I'm so devout in my faith that
Sure.
and
I'll be
I'm
saving myself.
I'm
Thank you so
saving
much.
I'm saving myself for marriage." And I also used to lie and tell people that I was like super concerned with STIs
Yeah, you've
because
seen the video. Come
I've
up to
seen
speed with this. Yeah.
right, like I've seen the video. I know what can happen. I'm not about that life. And so I literally carried that all the way up until like maybe when I was getting my master's in grad school
Mhm.
or maybe college when I started to kind of play around and do things. But then again, I was never the focus. I was never, it was never important for me to take my pants off, right? I would always make up some excuse. And so it wasn't really until I got married, to be honest, when those moments started to happen,
Mhm.
and how me and my wife kind of navigated it. I felt like at one point of our relationship, I just was just like, hey, this is about. But by this point, I had been a nudist for maybe 8 years, and so I was pretty comfortable, getting naked by the time I got married, which was great for me. Being able to jump into intimacy but you're doing it with somebody that you actually love and you care about. But yeah, my sex life was like non-existent up until my late 20s. Really, So
But what you're saying is that the nudism, the naturism helped give you the confidence to, explore intimacy.
Yeah, I think it kind of started to work as a form of like, you start to learn about all the things that the misconceptions, right? You start to
Yeah.
kind of wrestle with those misconceptions, but you have new information to compare those misconceptions with.
Yeah.
So I think that, my journey into naturism, my journey into, becoming a self-proclaimed nudist, like wearing that badge. I think for the first time, it was just being around diverse body types and seeing things that didn't necessarily align with the porn that I was watching. And so I felt like it was a more human experience, right? I felt like, it was more natural.
Mm.
And, and although naturism isn't necessarily about just getting around in a circle and checking everybody out and seeing what happens, I do realize that, that does happen, especially the earlier you are into your journey. But I think it was also one of the things about naturism, especially when I started to explore it back home in Missouri. Um, a lot of the people that were in this space, just to say I stuck out, right? I was the only person of color in this space.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, I was the only person of color. And then also I was probably the only person under like 45 in a lot of these spaces. So here I am, maybe like 22, 23, and the closest person to my age most times was like 45.
What was it about those spaces that appealed to you then? Why was that something that you wanted to be part of, given that you weren't seeing your own experience reflected back at you somehow?
Well, I think it was the excitement that I felt to finally, not have to hide.
Ah.
But it was also the safety and knowing that none of my friends would show up to this.
Oh, right. The isolation was actually a benefit. So I
Yeah,
can
it was
be me over here because no one I know is going to see me.
exactly. It was definitely a
Right.
benefit until I
Ah.
ran into one of my aunt's friends.
And no.
You know what I mean? And like, or somebody that I ran into who was an alumni at the same high school that I went to. But again, it wasn't like we ran in the same circles. So, and then I also kind of developed this understanding that, hey, if I run into you at a nudist house party,
You're at the
um,
naked house party as well.
you're
So
you're at the naked house party as well. So we obviously have something in common, and you're not gonna just like out me as soon as you see me on the streets in
into the
clothes.
family group chat.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, these are really, really good questions. So, I mean, I guess like we can just jump like straight into like the nudism conversation.
Let's do it.
So, with your podcast, can you kind of talk about like I guess the ideals of the Naked Men Talking podcast and how that connects to your interest or, your introduction into nudism?
Sure. I guess I started without much of a plan in that I thought, why not just do a few episodes of me chatting to people I know who like to get naked and see how that goes? Because I was really still learning a bit about podcasts and still figuring out if it was something I was interested in. And I was, relatively new to naturism as well. Like, I'd been to a lot of naked beaches, but that was about it, sort of thing. And I just started by bullying people that I knew to get on a call with me to record. And it's just kind of grown from there. And it seems to be mainly conversations that, a lot like this, where we just get to talk about our experiences and, how we've navigated through stuff like body image and masculinity and sexuality and how that's shaped who we are as people. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, like I said earlier, this isn't a space that I feel like we typically get to have. So, if it means that, scheduling an hour podcast episode to talk about all the things that you probably have thought about over the years, and that a lot of your friends have similar experiences, but just out of comfort, you may have never brought it up, right? I love that you have a platform in which invites men to be vulnerable. I don't know how things are in the UK, but there's a stereotype here in the US that, that men just aren't as vulnerable as we could be. How society, especially black men, thinking about just my community, right? How black men aren't always given the space, or we aren't expected to be vulnerable. If you ask my wife, she probably would say that I could use some work. So I can't wait till she actually hears this episode. She's probably gonna cringe a lot. I'm actually
A lot of
recording.
information for her to process.
Yes, yes. My studio is actually in the man cave, so in the basement of my house. She's currently upstairs, probably sleep. So I can't wait till she hears this. Hey babe, how you doing? Love you. But I guess so. You mentioned how nudism intersects with your podcast. Do you remember your first actual nudist experience? You mentioned beaches. Was it that, or yeah? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, the first meaningful one would have to be a naked beach, I think. And, particularly on holidays in Europe where naked beaches are or clothing optional beaches are kind of everywhere and very normalized. So it's not a big event to go to a naked beach. It's just that every beach you're on, there's going to be some naked people. And so, the more I saw of that and the more I thought, well, everyone's taking their clothes off. Let's take our clothes off, and you realize how much, you know, how much more enjoyable that is somehow, how liberating that is, how nice it is to be able to swim in the ocean with your clothes off kind of thing. And so you really just start to look for more opportunities to do that. So I never really came at it from any sort of philosophical sort of, or, any sense of purpose around naturism. It's really just that it's just something I enjoy doing.
Yeah, and I love how like your experience speaks to a lot of like what we've come to know about the UK here in the States. Like I'm looking at the things that like British naturism are doing, and it just seems as if nudity is less taboo in the UK than it is here. Because ultimately, I don't know about you, like the closest nude beach for me is in New Jersey. It's in Sandy Hook, New Jersey. There's a beach called Gunnison, and from where I live, it's about a 3.5 hour drive.
Hmm.
So I think the closest beach from Gunnison would be probably Hallover in Miami, which is a 16-hour drive for me.
Yeah, none of these places are convenient for you.
Hey,
So what if you're not on the beach? Then how are you exploring your naturism? Is it house parties, or are you going to campgrounds? What's it look like for you on a day-to-day basis?
yeah, a lot of it is just being at home. You know what I mean? Just being
Uh-huh.
comfortable, being at home. A lot of it is, you know, in the summer months, we have campgrounds, or one in particular in the area that's about 45 minutes away from my house. And then it's through my connection with the Black Natures Association, and then they host different events. I am an ambassador with them, and so we do events periodically throughout the year and different meetups. But yeah, it's really just the beach. That's the biggest, I guess, my biggest way of being involved. So it is taking that 3 hour drive, a few times in the summertime, or, all the way up into
Mm.
the fall, until it's just too cold to be out there. So yeah, like what about you?
I guess most of my day-to-day activity is sort of house parties in London. So if I go on vacation, I'll go somewhere where there's opportunities to get naked, and so that might be in Spain or France or wherever kind of thing. So there's lots of places where it's sunny, you can get your clothes off. But here in the UK, where the weather's a bit more unpredictable, it's mostly small group social naturism opportunities. People would host events in their house, and so like events such as, we've got a naked book club, we do naked potluck, there's a naked port and poetry evening we do, naked yoga is really popular obviously. So that kind of stuff is where we tend to explore our naturism on a regular basis.
Yeah, and so how, I guess, would you say a lot of your friends are into this, or is this something like a solo project? Is it something that you kind of do on your own?
No, it is a bit of both. I've met a lot of friends through naturism activities. So the naturism came first, I guess, and I met people through that I've connected with and stayed friends with. But also some of my friends who I knew outside of, naturist events, I will take with me to naked yoga, or invite along to a naked event. And because I've been on vacation with them and know that they're happy getting their clothes off anyway. So it is a bit of both.
And I guess, how do you think, I guess, having a support system, right? Like having friends who are okay with this, like how does that impact you all's relationship?
Relationship with the friends, I think it deepens it definitely, because it not only normalizes the things that I'm interested in, but it also just means that we're at a level of comfort that we can, exist in a naked space really comfortably together, but also talk about things with because I'm not sure if you've experienced this or not, but what I tend to find is that you have different conversations when you're naked with someone than when you've got clothes on. And so to be able to have those naked conversations with friends and when you can talk about anything, I think is really eye opening in terms of, oh, this is what friendship feels like. We can share everything.
Yeah, because I think that, when you have friends who are also nudist, or who also, don't mind being in that space, I think a lot of the walls or things that we would normally kind of hold up,
Mm,
and barriers that we put between us and others, I think naturism has a way of kind of moving those barriers out of the way. And I'm not just saying that it automatically happens, but I think that it's a lot more likely to be more open when you are with friends in that type of space. Because for a lot of us who have, grown up dealing with different insecurities, I think that void of those insecurities, we want to be open. And it's easier for us to be open once those, insecurities are eliminated. So I'm really happy to hear
mm.
about your experience. I guess, what are some things that you're looking forward to as we, look to kind of wrap up? We've been talking almost an hour, and really, really great conversation. I feel like I was the guest on the show. And
Sorry about that.
so, no, thank you. Thank you. I actually appreciate it. But talk to me about, I guess, what you have coming up on the podcast.
Yes. Well, on the podcast, it's a lot more of the same, I guess. Conversations with guys from all over the world, all aspects of getting naked and exploring bodies and masculinity and sexuality. So guests from the US and Australia, from across Europe, and also here in the UK. So that's all to come. Events as well. We've got a lot of events coming through. We've got naked co-working is something we do on a regular basis. So we've got a whole series of those events coming up, which is like we work, but everyone's naked. And then there's a big camping trip coming up in July, which will be sort of 200 men getting together for a weekend of naked camping. And so we're hoping for some good weather for that.
So are these like events that, you are like actively a part of coordinating, or are you partnering with like local groups in the area?
A bit of both, in that the things like naked co-working and things, that's just me being a bit of an organizer. But the camping is the Naturist Association that I'm part of, which is called Naked Mates. This is their annual camping trip, and they host that at a campsite in the middle of England somewhere. So it's not a naked campsite, but we just take it over for the weekend.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, you mentioned about 200 people.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really nice number. It's a great location. You're in the middle of the fields, so everyone can be naked with no drama. And there's a forest nearby, so you can go walking in that as well. And everyone gets involved in the cooking, and there's so it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm super excited to hear more about how that goes for you, and I'm sure you'll definitely be sharing these experiences on your podcast. So, in kind of wrapping up, as I think about the analytics, one thing since I've started podcasting last year, one thing that I feel like I'm starting to become addicted to is like analytics and numbers and reach, trying to figure out, not just for the sake of saying, oh, I have 1,000 listeners, it's more so about, how do I create content that my listeners would actually appreciate, sharing stories or telling stories that I'm passionate about, but also that I feel like will land favorably with the people who are supporting me, right?
Mm.
And right now, I'm thinking about, like, I'm looking at my analytics, like, as we speak, and let's see, my audience is 86.5% male,
Oh wow.
right?
Does that feel what you're expecting?
I'm actually not surprised, right? Because I feel like nudism, especially in the US, is heavily male dominated. So like when you go to these different events, there's a lot of guys there. And so kind of thinking about the fact that, 86% of my listeners are males, want to give you the last words to kind of, if you could speak to men and get men talking, that's a play on words. What would you say to guys as it pertains to body image, overcoming insecurities, self-love, naturism, comparison, all the things?
No, I know what you mean. And it's difficult to give advice, isn't it? Because, what the best advice is usually the simplest. And it sounds really trite until it sort of hits you and resonates with you and go, oh, no, right, nothing actually matters. Because really, no one cares as much about you and your body as you do. So all of that insecurity is all happening in your head, and it's holding you back and is limiting your potential and your ability to experience, life and enjoyment and pleasure. So the quicker you can find ways to let go of that and just relax and be who you are, then you'll see the benefits of that immediately. But in terms of how you do that, that's really just a case of figuring it out, taking small steps, pushing your boundaries, putting yourself in places that feel uncomfortable, and learning and growing from that.
I love that. To really, really give you the last opportunity, is there anything that you want to promote before we end?
No, check out the podcast. It's called Naked Men Talking. It's available on all podcast platforms. At my website, I have newsletters and a whole lot of content on gtv.blue, or you can find me on Blue Sky at GTV London.
Well, thank you so much, Gareth. I really appreciate, you being willing to jump on. And I think I'm going to be jumping on your podcast soon, right?
Exactly. Looking forward to it. We're going to talk nakedness.
I mean, hey, we just continuing the conversation, but no, it really is a joy to have you. And again, to kind of model what having this conversation with other guys can look like. I think that a lot of people will hear this episode and hopefully see themselves or see their brothers and fathers in some of these points that we made during this conversation. And I hope that it's healing for a lot of people. But with that being said, thank you so much for listening. This is the Bear With Me podcast. I am your host, Jay, and look forward to seeing you all in the comments. Have a good one.